Going once. The auctioneer's voice cut across the flat Texas morning like a hammer on dry wood. Gerald Marsh stood behind the courthouse-issued podium in the dirt yard of the Hodges farm, gavel raised, sweat already darkening the collar of his good suit, his eyes moving over the crowd with the practiced patience of a man who had done this before and would do it again, and felt nothing either time. The number on his lips was $4,800. The farm in front of him, 340 acres of Brackett County, Texas, a white frame house, a red barn, a drilled well, 62 years of one family's life pressed into cracked earth and cedar fence posts, was about to belong to someone else. The man in the pale grey suit near the back of the crowd gave a small, practised nod. C.F. Leland, land acquisitions representative out of Dallas, had been nodding all morning, with the quiet confidence of someone who had already done the paperwork. Eleanor May Hodges stood alone near the porch steps, a few feet away from the crowd, hands pressed together at her mouth, lips moving without sound. She was 67 years old. She had lived on this land for 41 years. She had buried her husband Carl in the county cemetery 7 months ago and had not asked a single person for help since. She was not asking now. She was simply standing in the August heat, watching the last thing Carl had ever given her go to the highest bidder in under 4 minutes. Marsh lifted the gavel. Going? $4,800. The voice came from the back of the crowd, near the gate. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of voice that had spent 30 years filling movie theatres from wall to wall, and it moved through that dusty Texas yard the way a stone moves through still water, without effort and all the way to the edge. Every head turned. For a moment, no one moved. John Wayne stood beside a dusty pickup truck, hat pushed back, arms folded across his chest, looking at Gerald Marsh with an expression of complete and unhurried calm. But that moment didn't start there. Not in that yard, not on that morning. To understand why John Wayne drove alone to a farm auction in Brackett County, Texas, on a Tuesday in August of 1953, you have to go back 6 weeks, to a diner on Commerce Street in San Antonio, and a conversation that nobody planned and nobody forgot. If you've never heard this story about the Duke, stay with us. You're going to want to hear how it ends. And if you love these stories, hit that subscribe button right now, because we're just getting started. 6 weeks earlier, Eleanor Hodges sat at the kitchen table of the farmhouse she had not left in 3 days. The curtains were drawn. The coffee on the stove had gone cold. In front of her, 2 envelopes. One from First National Bank of San Antonio, postmarked July 2nd, 1953. One from her youngest son, Robert, postmarked from a military base outside Seoul. She opened the bank letter first. She already knew what it said. Carl Hodges had bought the first parcel of this land in 1921 with $600 saved from 6 years of cattle work in the Texas Hill Country. He was 24 years old and owned nothing else in the world except a good horse and a reputation for keeping his word. He added the South Acres in 1931 during the worst of the Depression, when every neighbour told him he was a fool to spend money on land nobody could work. He built the white frame house in 1935, the red barn in 1938. He drilled the well in 1941, the week before he drove himself to the enlistment office in San Antonio without telling Eleanor until the night before he left. He came back from the war quieter and slower, with a tremor in his left hand he never explained and never complained about. But he always said the same thing about the land. He said it the way other men said grace. The land is the one thing nobody can take from you if you hold it right. What Eleanor didn't know, what Carl had never told her, was that in the spring of 1952, a flash flood had destroyed 400 feet of the south fence line. The repair cost $900. Carl didn't have it. He took out a note at First National for the full amount, planning to cover it by fall from the cattle lease on the South Acres. He died of a heart attack in the South Pasture on a cold January morning in 1953, before he ever made a single payment. He died alone, between the fence and the tree line, in the field he had loved most. The bank had waited 7 months. Their patience was finished. The auction was set for August 14th. Eleanor folded both letters, set them on the table, and told no one. John Wayne was not supposed to be in San Antonio in July of 1953. He was supposed to be in Los Angeles, in meetings with Republic Pictures about a production scheduled to begin shooting in New Mexico that fall. He arrived in San Antonio for 4 days of location scouting along the hill country river roads and ended up staying 9. Nobody on his team could fully explain it afterward. Wayne himself never offered a reason. He simply stayed, the way a man stays in a place that feels like something he recognises without being able to name it. On the 6th morning, he walked into a diner on Commerce Street called the Frontier Grill and sat at the counter and ordered black coffee and scrambled eggs. 2 stalls down sat a man named Ray Pruitt, 58 years old, former ranch hand, former army sergeant, both knees ruined by 30 years of hard work and 1 bad winter in the Ardennes. Ray had worked Carl Hodges' land for 11 years before his body quit on him. He recognised Wayne immediately and said nothing, because Ray Pruitt was not the kind of man who made a fuss over anyone. They started talking the way men talk at counters, about the heat, about the cattle market, about what was happening to the small ranchers across the hill country, getting bought out by land acquisition companies rolling in from Dallas and Houston with other people's money and no intention of ever setting foot on the land they purchased. Ray talked about it the way a man talks about something that genuinely grieves him. Wayne listened the way he always listened, completely, without interrupting, without looking away. At some point, Ray set down his coffee cup and said, almost to himself, "Got a widow woman up in Brackett County. Carl Hodges' wife. Bank's taking the farm in 2 weeks. 67 years old. Won't ask anybody for help." He paused. Carl's name still means something around here. Doesn't seem right. Wayne asked 4 questions. Ray answered all of them. By the time Wayne paid the check, he knew Eleanor's full name, the size of the debt, the date of the auction, and the name of the bank. That evening, from his hotel room, he placed 1 call to his accountant in Los Angeles. He asked a single question. "What do I have liquid right now?" His accountant told him. Wayne said, "Good. I need a cashier's check for $5,000 by Monday." "What for, Duke?" "A farm in Texas." Drop a comment below. Did you already know this story? Let's see how many true Duke fans are out there watching. August 14th, 1953, 9:47 in the morning. The sun already white and hard over the flat Brackett County plain. 43 people had gathered in the dirt yard outside the Hodges farmhouse. Ranchers in work clothes, land speculators in city shoes, and Gerald Marsh behind his podium, shuffling papers with the efficiency of a man who felt nothing about what he was doing, and never had. Eleanor stood near the porch steps, slightly apart from everyone else, wearing her church dress, because Carl had always said you dressed for the things that mattered, even the hard ones. She had been standing there 20 minutes without speaking to anyone. Nobody approached her. They didn't know what to say to a woman watching her life be auctioned in the morning heat. Marsh opened at $3,500. Within 90 seconds, it had climbed to $4,400, driven almost entirely by C.F. Leland, the Dallas representative in the pale grey suit, bidding with small, practiced nods, the mechanical confidence of a man spending a corporation's money. The neighbouring ranchers dropped away one by one. At $4,400, Eleanor closed her eyes and pressed her hands to her mouth. Her lips moved without sound. Carl. The barn he built. The well he drilled. The morning he left for the war. Marsh lifted the gavel. Going once? $4,800. The yard went silent. Marsh stopped mid-sentence. Leland turned. The reporter's hand moved to his notepad, and Eleanor May Hodges opened her eyes. John Wayne stood at the gate, arms folded, hat pushed back, looking at Marsh with the calm patience of a man who had nowhere else to be. Leland recovered. 5,000, he said, louder than necessary. Wayne looked at him, not with anger, not with urgency, just a long, steady look that told everyone watching the conversation was already over. Then back to Marsh. 5,200. Leland glanced at his associate. The associate shook his head. There was a ceiling on what he was authorised to spend. He picked up his briefcase and walked to his car without looking back. The gavel came down 3 times. The Hodges farm sold for $5,200. To John Wayne. He walked across the yard toward Eleanor, hat in hand, and reached into his shirt pocket. The deed, already signed back to her name, arranged the morning before he ever drove to Brackett County. Carl's farm needed to stay Carl's farm, he said quietly. I just held it for a minute. Eleanor took the deed with both hands and said nothing. But 7 months of silence and fear left her face all at once, quietly, the way pressure leaves the earth after a long rain. Wayne asked one thing of Eleanor before he left that afternoon. Not repayment, not publicity. He asked her to write to Robert in Korea and tell him the farm was safe. That was all. Eleanor promised. Wayne shook her hand the way men in that part of Texas sealed agreements. 2 hands, firm, brief, and walked back to his pickup without looking at the crowd. His production team in San Antonio never knew where he had gone that Tuesday. His manager found out weeks later, second-hand from Ray Pruitt. He called Wayne to discuss it. Wayne's response, according to his manager's later account, was 4 words. It's done. Move on. No press release, no charitable foundation announcement, no mention in any interview in 1953, 1954, or 1955. The Brackett County Gazette reporter who had been standing in that yard with his notepad never published a word. Nobody ever fully explained why. Some stories are too quiet for newspapers. Some moments resist being turned into headlines. 3 weeks after the auction, Eleanor mailed a letter to Wayne's production company in Hollywood. 4 pages, handwritten on blue pharmacy stationery, neat and unhurried. She didn't thank him extravagantly. That wasn't her nature. She wrote about Carl, about the morning he built the first section of fence in 1921, about the way October light moved across the south pasture. Near the end, she wrote one sentence that said everything she needed to say. Carl would have called you a good man. That is the highest thing I know how to say. Wayne's secretary recalled him reading it twice, folding it carefully and placing it in the inside pocket of his jacket. When she cleaned his desk the following week, the letter was gone. It stayed gone for 26 years, until the day he died. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in what John Wayne stood for. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Eleanor Hodges worked that farm until she could no longer lift a fence post or walk the south pasture without stopping to rest. She leased the cattle grazing rights to a neighbouring rancher, kept the kitchen garden, tended the house the way Carl had taught her to tend it, with attention and without complaint. She told the story of the auction only twice in her lifetime. Once to Robert when he came home from Korea in the spring of 1954, sitting at the same kitchen table where she had opened the bank letter 14 months earlier. And once to a neighbouring woman she had known for 40 years, on a winter evening in 1967, over coffee, almost casually, the way people sometimes release the most important stories of their lives when they are not trying to tell them at all. She kept one thing on the mantel of the farmhouse for the rest of her life. Not a photograph of Wayne, Not the deed, which she kept folded in the family Bible. A single newspaper clipping. A film still from one of his westerns, cut from a magazine someone had left at the feed store. In the clipping, Wayne was on horseback, hat low, looking at something in the distance the camera couldn't see. Eleanor had written 3 words across the bottom in her careful handwriting. Carl's good man. When she passed in 1971 at the age of 85, the farm went to Robert, who had spent 17 years working cattle and raising 2 sons in Brackett County and had never once considered selling. Robert's sons kept it after him. The fence lines Carl built in 1921 were still standing, repaired and extended across 3 generations of the same hands. The well Carl drilled in 1941 still produced clean water. The red barn needed a new roof in 1988, but the frame was original, every beam Carl had placed himself in the summer of 1938, and the family kept it because some things are worth the cost of preserving. In 2004, a Brackett County historian researching Depression-era land records came across the 1953 auction filing in the courthouse archives. The buyer line read John Wayne. The transfer line, dated the same day, read Eleanor May Hodges. The historian traced the paperwork carefully, found Ray Pruitt's name in a secondary document, found the bank receipt, found the deed transfer. He published a short piece in the Brackett County Gazette, the same paper whose reporter had stood in that yard 51 years earlier and never written a word. The piece ran on a Tuesday. Small circulation. Most people never saw it. But the people who mattered did. After Wayne died in June of 1979, his personal staff began the quiet work of sorting through his home office in Newport Beach. Inside a locked drawer of his desk, beneath a stack of unfinished correspondence and 2 unmarked film canisters, they found a folded document. At the top, an auction receipt. Brackett County, Texas, August 14th, 1953. $5,200. Below it, folded inside, 4 pages of blue pharmacy stationery in a woman's careful handwriting. Eleanor's letter. He had carried it from his jacket pocket to that drawer sometime in the fall of 1953 and had never moved it again. 26 years. Every house he lived in, every film he made, every mile he travelled between them, that letter stayed in the drawer. Nobody on his staff had ever heard him mention Eleanor Hodges, or the farm, or Brackett County. Not once. That was exactly how he had intended it. John Wayne made 142 films. He won an Oscar. He became an American icon so complete that the name Duke requires no explanation in any room in this country. But on a Tuesday morning in August of 1953, in a dirt yard in Texas, with a widow's hands pressed to her mouth and a Dallas landman's gavel about to fall, he did the most John Wayne thing he ever did in his life. He raised his hand, he paid the price, he signed the paperback, and he drove away without telling anyone. Carl Hodges once said the land was the one thing nobody could take from you if you held it right. Turns out he was correct. He just needed one good man to hold it for a minute. If you believe they don't make men like John Wayne anymore, subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story today. We'll see you in the next one.